Lakuta Sichas Chelek Chavtas, the Sicha for Parshas Vayelech, Lili Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Kaltman. A very, very fascinating insight into Moshe's final day on this earth and what he teaches us with regards to our integral connection with Torah. The pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Yidden, today I am 120 years old, I cannot come and go. Chazal explained this doesn't mean literally Moshe was physically weak and therefore could not physically walk to come and to go. Nor lotzes v'lavei b'divrei Torah. Moshe was saying he can't come and go. He can't engage in the words of Torah, in the teaching of Torah. Melamed, and this teaches us shenistatmu mimenu shari chachma, that the gates of wisdom were hidden from him. This is what the Chazal say. This is a Gemara in Masechta Sotah, that when Moshe says the yuchad lotzes v'lavei, he means that I cannot engage in words of Torah because the gates of wisdom have been withheld from me. This statement is also brought in Rashi, nor b'shinui lashon, but with a change in the expression. And instead of saying that the gates of wisdom were sealed for him, is their lashon in Rashi, masoros umayones hachachma. Rashi says the traditions and the wellsprings of wisdom. That's what was concealed from him. That was what was sealed from him. Now, we're going to try to figure out where Rashi gets his nusach from, and why he chooses that nusach. In Ein Yankiv al derech zabekam rishonim v'erki berachti girsa in Gemara mayones and shtat shari. So the Ein Yankiv and other early sources read the text in the Gemara to say mayones instead of shari, not the gates of wisdom, but the wellsprings of wisdom. Unin Tanchuma Parshas Vayeschanan is the girsa maseides Chachma, and the Tanchuma, which is a medrash in Parshas Vayeschanan, brings the expression Maseides Chachma, the tradition or the traditions of wisdom. So we see that the term Mayonis is used, and the term Maseides is used in other places. Aber, and this is the Rabbi's question. First of all, why doesn't Rashi use the more widespread accepted version of Shari Chachma? So besides the fact that we're asking in our Gemara, and this is the common, most accepted version, the term is Shari Chachma. Why does Rashi not go with that version? Is Oid V'Iker, even if there's a reason why Rashi doesn't want to follow that, we have a even greater question. Men gefindt nicht in Ergitz b'medrashe Chazal shelafanenu, as es sollen sich bringen, beide Lashonos, Maseides u'Mayonos, Eichnit Maseides v'Shari. We don't find any medrash, any source that combines two of the expressions. The Gemara says Shari. Another version of the Gemara says Mayonos. A Tanchuma says Maseides. Fine. But there's no source that takes two expressions and combines them together. Und Rashi is mitzarev beide gesois zusammen, and Rashi goes and combines two separate versions into one. So obviously there's a significance there. Obviously there's something that Rashi couldn't go with the Gemara, or couldn't go with one of the two Lashonos. Why does Rashi have to combine two of them? Move on. It's also not understood. It is not Rashi's way to specifically quote the sources verbatim, which means Rashi wants more that the student should understand. So it's not so important to say the words as much as it is to give the explanation. So Lefiza binyanenu, and if that's the case, then we have another question in our Rashi. Why is Rashi sticking to the original text of the Gemara or the Medrash, and doesn't use a more common expression? Rashi begins his pirush that Moshe says, I can't come or go in the words of Torah, with words of Torah. So the Rashi should have said that the words of Torah were concealed from him, were hidden from him. In other words, if the point here is that Moshe can't teach Torah anymore, so why does Rashi not just say that, instead of using these more eloquent expressions that are culled together from different sources in earlier Chazal? So our question is basically, why does Rashi not say Shari Chachma? Why does Rashi combine together two separate versions? And why does Rashi not just use the words B'divrei Torah, which are much more which are much easier for the student to understand. V'yesh leimar. So the Rebbe begins the answer. As Rashi bavorin der mita shaila psuta beloshen ha'elam klotz kasha. Rashi is addressing a very basic, fundamental question. As the world is an expression of klotz kasha. Rabbi Shapiro in his shir, he points out that klotz kasha is often translated a question that, like a silly question, like a question that someone that's not smart would ask. Like the term klutz, which is often used to mean someone not so smart. Rabbi Shapiro says, here the pshat is a klutz kasha. Klutz also means a log of wood. It's a very firm question. It's a basic, so fundamental that it's a strong question. The Rebbe says, I haven't found anyone who addresses this question. Here is the question that's bothering Rashi. How can we say that Moshe is saying that I cannot anymore engage in words of Torah, where we see that immediately after the statement, Moshe continues to convey many Torah teachings to the people. The dry Sederis, Vayelech, Hazinu, and Zesabracha, which are written into the three Sederis. This is the beginning of Vayelech. So you have the whole Vayelech, the whole Hazinu, and the whole Zesabracha. And even if you're going to point out to me that at the end of Zesabracha, there's parts that there's a machlokes if Moshe wrote it or not, says the Rebbe, that's only the last 8 psukim. Und norben again, die letzte 8 psukim von Torah, was heben sich an mit Vayamos shal Moshe, gefim in 2 days. It's only with regards to the last 8 psukim that describe Moshe's passing, we find 2 opinions in the Gemara. And Rashi brings it in Parshas Bracha. Did Yeshua write it or did Moshe write it with tears in his eyes? In other words, the Torah says Moshe passed away. So the question is, how could Moshe write that he passed away if he's still alive? The answer is, either one opinion is that Yeshua actually wrote those last 8 psukim. The other answer is that Hashem dictated it to Moshe, and Moshe wrote it even while he was still alive. He wrote about what was about to happen, that he was about to pass away. So there may be an opinion that the last 8 psukim where Taka came through Yeshua. But with regards to the whole 3 parashas, including V'zei Sabracha, besides for those last 8 psukim, there's no one that argues Moshe is the one that said it to the Yidden and wrote it down into the Torah. So we see clearly that Moshe is teaching Torah. What does it mean? I can't engage in words of Torah. So you might say that Moshe is referring to halacha, that he was teaching the text of Torah Shebiksav, but he couldn't teach halacha anymore. So the Rabbi says, no, that Moshe was saying that I can't teach halacha, for 2 points. If you're saying the statement is I can't engage in words of Torah, and you're going to say, no, it doesn't mean words of Torah, it means halacha. It's very difficult to say that when you say words of Torah, you don't mean the actual words of Torah which Moshe is teaching. But it's oid ve'ikir. But even more importantly, in Adi Parshas, these Parshas contain halacha too. Moshe was teaching them not just his last will and testament, which is what Chumash Dvarim is made up of, but it includes halachas, including in these parashas, mitzvahs hakel, ksivas sefer Torah, v'oid, and others. In other words, the basics in parashas Vayelech is hakel and sefer Torah. But there's other halachas as well that Rabbi points out in Ara 19 as an example. In parashas Hazinu, there's a pasuk. Kishem Hashem Ekra, Havu Goydel Lekenu, when I call out to Hashem's name, let us give greatness to Hashem. And Rashi brings that this is the source of the halacha, that when Hashem's name is mentioned in the Beis HaMikdash, the crowd would respond, Baruch Shem Kivei Machusi Leilam Vayed, which is a halacha in Torah. So you can't say that Moshe was saying, I could teach the parashiyos, but I can't teach halacha. Because in these parashiyos, there is halacha. So the Rebbe says, maybe the pshat is that Moshe could teach Torah Shebiksav, but he couldn't teach Torah Shebal Peh. Says the Rebbe, no, Nachmer. Der Wort von Torah Shebiksav is gegeben geworden zu Moshe mit seinem Pirush Torah Shebal Peh. Every single word of Torah Shebiksav was given to Moshe with its meaning according to Torah Shebal Peh. That's the only way to know how to read and translate and explain the Torah Shebiksav. It's self-understood. The Torah says, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Without Torah Shebal Peh, you have no idea what that means. Torah says to put tefillin between your eyes without Torah Sheba'al Peh. You don't know what that means. The only way to understand, even the Nekudas, do you say B'chalev imay or B'chelev imay? How do you even read the words? That's the tradition of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So when Moshe was taught Torah Shebiksav by the Eibishter, it automatically came with a Torah Sheba'al Peh that was explaining it. And since these three sedres were being given over, were being conveyed to the Yidden through Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe certainly conveyed to them all of the necessary details that they would need in order to understand the Torah Shebiksav in all of its meanings. Thus says, which includes the meaning of the words according to Torah Sheba'al Peh. So Moshe was teaching these three parashas, including words of halacha, including words of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So what does it mean? I cannot engage, I cannot come and go in the words of Torah if Moshe is teaching Torah, and not just Torah Shebiksav, and not just halacha, but Torah Sheba'al Peh as well. So what is Moshe not teaching? The Rebbe is Rashi that's where Rashi adds these words, that the traditions and the well springs of Chachma, of wisdom, were hidden from him. Because with regards to these two concepts, Maseiris and Mayones HaChachma, traditions and well springs of wisdom, Ishayich zu sagen, as sie seine nicht nichel geworden in die Divinität, was Moshe Rabbeinu hat gelernt mit ihnen in die drei Sedres, you could say about them that they're not included in the words of Torah that Moshe was teaching to the Yidden in these three Sedres, and therefore Moshe is saying is that even though I am teaching, even though I'm still going to teach you these three sedres, Torah Shebiksav, Torah Sheba'al Peh, and Halacha, but there is some aspects of Torah that are concealed from me that I cannot teach you, and they are specifically Maseiros and Bayanes HaChachma Kidei L'Kaman, as the Rebbe will explain. So first thing the Rebbe is going to do is going to explain to us what is Maseiros and what is Bayanes HaChachma, that these are the things that Moshe was not anymore able to teach the Yidden. And this is what Moshe meant when he said, L'yuchal le'ed lasis v'laveh b'divrei Torah. The Teitz von Wort Maseiris is the Inyonim L'chazainen Nimser Geworden zu Moshe Misinai Ba'al Peh. Maseiris, which literally means Meseira, the tradition, the things that were conveyed or transmitted, maybe is a better word, is referring to the things that were transmitted to Moshe at Har Sinai orally. Specifically referring to those things that have no source, no backing, not even a hint in the teachings of Torah Shebiksav, which is commonly known as halacha l'Moshe Misinai. There are certain halachas that have no mocker, have no source in Torah Shebiksav. For example, if we said before, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk, so the Torah says, so Chacham tell us it means don't cook milk and meat. So even though we need the Torah Sheba'al Peh to teach it to us, but the Torah Sheba'al Peh is leaning on the source in Torah Shebiksav. That we just have to know what it means. Then there are certain parts of Torah that have no source in Torah. The only way we know it is halacha l'Moshe Misinai, because Moshe was told this in an oral way, and Moshe transmitted it to us. For example, the fact that the ritzuos of tefillin have to be black. There's no makir in Torah that in Torah Shebiksav, not even the Remez. There's Kabbalistic reasons and there's other information that we have today. But the halacha, the ritzuos of tefillin have to be black, is halacha l'Moshe Misinai. So the Rebbe is teaching the word Maseiros means those things that were transmitted to Moshe orally without leaning on any written part of the written Torah. When the Gemara sagt, as the Gemara says, Torah roi b'ksav u'miyot alpeh. The Gemara says that most of Torah is written, and the minority amount of Torah is orally, which has to be understood. One second. Today, if you look at it, Mishnah, Gemara, Rishonim, Achronim, Poskim, there's so much that's Torah Sheba'al Peh. What do you mean that it's the minority? Rashi explains, Roiv Biksav, that which the Gemara says that most of the Torah is written. It means Roiv HaTorah Tluya B'Medrash, that most of the Torah as we know it is dependent on the expounding of it based on Torah Shebiksav. For example, we say it every morning in davening. The Torah gave us 13 attributes, 13 tools with which to understand the Torah. For example, kal v'chomer. The Torah prohibits marrying a granddaughter. The Torah does not explicitly prohibit marrying a daughter. So the Chacham say, if a granddaughter is not allowed, for sure a daughter is not allowed. So this is considered biksav because it's being learned from something that's biksav. So most of the Torah, as we know it, could be traced back to a source in Torah shebiksav. Whereas there is a minority amount. There is no source, not even a hint in Torah shebiksav, but it was told to Moshe orally. So there is Masoros refers to those things that cannot be found in Torah shebiksav, and we know them because the Eibishter told it to Moshe directly, and Moshe transmitted that to us. So that's Taich Masoros. Mayones HaChachma meant niti gufli halachas von Torah shebal peh, nor pilpula shel Torah. Mayones refers not to the halacha section of Torah, but to pilpul. Pilpul is to analyze and to delve deeper into the subject. Which is similar to like an overflowing fountain or an overflowing wellspring, which similarly when a person learns, you have the basic information and then you go deeper and deeper. So you take something and it fills and it overflows. Which is boundless, which is limitless. You can keep on going. Like the Torah says, like the pasuk says, and we refer this pasuk to Torah, that it is longer than the earth and broader than the seas. It's infinite. We see that Baruch Hashem, people are still learning Torah and still being mechadis b'Torah and still being mefalfel b'Torah, and even though it's been so many years, but it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. So what Moshe couldn't access was Masoros, the traditions that were the transmissions that were being given to him had stopped, as well as the concept of pilpula d'oraisa, the idea of being mefalfel, of analyzing and delving into the subjects of Torah. Und der Fundes verstandig über Pashtus, as in the Divrei Torah was Moshe Rabbeinu gelernt mit Eden, afilu in Perusha of Torah shebal peh. So now we understand that when Moshe was teaching the parasha Torah Vayelech Hazinu and V'zei Sabracha, which he was learning it, which he was teaching it together with Torah shebal peh. He was teaching them the actual halachas and the commentaries, the explanations as they are in Torah shebal peh, aber nicht pilpul. So the things that are limited, so that Moshe was teaching. But Pilpula Deiraisa, which is unlimited, that Moshe did not teach to them. And the Rebbe adds a very important nekuda in the brackets. The Gemara says that the whole idea of Pilpula Deiraisa, that a person could delve deeper into Torah, was really given to Moshe and to his children. Moshe acted in a generous fashion and bequeathed it to the Jewish people. So clearly, in other words, until now that I was saying that because it's bli gvul, so you can't. There's no point at which you could say, okay, I gave you everything. So therefore, Moshe has to give them whatever is mugbal, whatever is limited, because he's giving them everything. So he has to give them until the edge. Until the cup is full. Besides for something that it's unlimited, that Moshe can't give them. Or doesn't have to give them. So the Rebbe adds another point. That not only is it bli gvul, but also the fact that originally was given to Moshe and wasn't given to the rest of the Yidden, it shows that you could reach Shleimus and Torah without pilpul. You could reach you can complete the study of Torah without engaging in pilpul. So that means that when Moshe gave to them was shmishleimus, Vayelech Hazinu Sabracha with halacha, with Torah shebal peh, Moshe gave them a complete package. What he did not give them is pilpula deiraisa. So what Moshe is saying, according to the way that Rabbi is teaching, is that Moshe is saying is that the transmissions that were coming to me orally all these years have stopped. And the ability to be mefalfel b'Torah, to delve deeper into Torah, that was withheld from me as well. Weil Pise ist verstandig, wer es ist considered it as afalpi was nicht moment Mercedes Miyanis Chachma. Now we understand that it's not a contradiction. Moshe is teaching Torah at the same time. Rashi is telling us that the transmissions and the well springs of the wisdom were withheld from him, were hidden from him. Von deswegen hat Moshe übergeben zu Yidden 30 Sedres bis Musa, and nevertheless Moshe transmitted to the Yidden 3 Sedres in a complete form. Side the Parashis Atzman Teresh Biksav, side Pirusha the Teresh Balpeh Pirusha Mamish, including the actual written words of Torah, including the oral explanation. Because these transmissions are not connected with the actual written Torah. So therefore, let's go back a second. So Moshe was giving them everything besides for Maseides and Mayonis. Because the Maseides, since they're transmitted orally, they're not connected to the written Torah, and therefore it's possible for Moshe to teach the whole written Torah and not give Maseides, because Maseides is not, like we said, it's not even found in Torah Shabbat. And with regards to Mayonis, there's no necessity, there's no requirement for Moshe to teach that. And therefore Moshe could have taught the Parashas B'Shlei Musan, and just what he did not teach them is the Maseides, which are not related to Torah Shebiksav, and that was withheld from him, and Pepula Deiraisa, which is not a necessary requirement to the teaching of Torah. So this answers one of our questions, why Rashi doesn't use the term Shari Chachma, which is the Girsa Revachas, which is the common accepted Girsa in Gemara. Because the word Shari Chachma, the gates of wisdom, are too vague. They don't address our questions. Our question is, how could you say how could you say that Moshe can't engage in Torah when he's teaching Torah? And therefore Rashi has to be very specific about what Moshe can't do, so we understand what Moshe cannot do, despite the fact that he's teaching Torah. So therefore Rashi has to say specifically Maseiris and Mayonis. This Rebbe explains another question which he did not address in the beginning. He didn't ask yet. But why does the Torah say Mayonis? Why does Rashi say Mayonis HaChachma, the well springs of wisdom, and not the well springs of Torah? Lahadgish, to emphasize, as the Mayonis are in it muchrech for inyan von Torah ve'ira, that these well springs that we're referring to are things that are not required for the law aspect of Torah, for the practical application of Torah. Because if it was, Moshe would have to teach it. We're referring to additional wisdom in Torah, which is not a necessary requirement, and therefore Moshe didn't have to teach it. So by saying the word hachachma, Rashi is just emphasizing again that we're talking specifically about something that is not part of the core aspect of Torah, which Moshe would have to teach, and which Moshe was teaching as part of Nitzav Vayelech Hazinu V'Zeis HaBracha. And in that case, what does it mean? It means Maseides and Mayonis. So in a sense, we've answered our question. Our question was, why does Rashi not use the Lashon Shari Chachma and instead use the Lashon Maseides or Mayonis? The answer is because Rashi is extremely bothered by the fact that it says that Moshe and then we see Moshe teaching Torah, and we explain that yes, Moshe taught them Torah B'Shlei Musa and everything that they needed to know with regards to those 3 parshias, but yet there were certain specific parts of Torah that Moshe did not teach, and that's what it means that he was not teaching anymore Maseides or Mayonis because it was withheld from him and he did not have access to it anymore. In Sif Dal, the Rebbe is going to ask, why is the lack of access to Mayonis HaChachma a reason that Moshe can't teach Torah at all? So here's the question. L'cheda is aber nachnit glatik. Der Inyan von Nistum Mimenu Maseides und Mayonis HaChachma kommt doch als Tam auf Leuchal Eid Lotzes V'Lavei b'divrei Torah. He's saying that was meant nicht im Limud La'atzmen, der Limud in Bnei Yisrael. The whole point is that Moshe is saying, I can't teach Torah to Yidden anymore. Why? Because these parts of Torah were concealed from me. Is it move on? Bishlam ben get to Maseides is move on. As Eib Nistum ba Moshe di Maseides von Torah kennen nit las es v'lavei. Sein der welcher geht über Torah zu Yidden. Weil Yidden müssen wissen nicht die Maseides. So with regards to Maseides, I understand that since Maseides are an integral part of Torah, Maybe not specifically integral to Vayelech as if there's a bracha, but it's an integral part of Torah. So if Moshe can't teach that, then he can't really teach Torah properly. Or when it gets to Mayonis HaChachma, Vibald Azeir Limud is nit muchach v'bnei Yisrael. Since we just explained that Pilpula Deiraisa is not a requirement, Vipas Zagen of as Vitadem was nist memeno Mayonis HaChachma is leiucha lidlatzes v'lavit so yiten b'divrei Torah. How does it make sense that Moshe is saying, I can't teach Torah to Yidden anymore because I don't have access to Pilpula Deiraisa? We just said that Pilpula Deiraisa is not necessary, it's not required. So why can't Moshe teach the Yidden other parts of Torah and not Mayonis HaChachma? So the Rebbe just said, Maseiris, I understand why it's a problem. So the Rebbe is saying maybe the pshat is that Moshe is saying I can't teach Torah anymore because I don't have the Maseiris, and Mayonis HaChachma is just added in extra. But because if that was the case, number one, why did Hashem cause that Moshe should not have access to the well springs of wisdom to Pilpul? If this is not affecting Moshe in any way, the lack of access to Mayonis HaChachma, why would Rashi say it? Why would Rashi add it in? In other words, we're trying to figure out how do we read the statement. Moshe is saying to the Yidden, I'm sorry, I can't engage in teaching Torah anymore. Why? Says Rashi, because he doesn't have access anymore to the transmissions, the oral transmissions of Torah, and to the well springs. So the question is like this: the Mayonis HaChachma he just explained are not necessary, not a required part of Torah. So why can't Moshe continue to teach Torah without the Mayonis HaChachma? Teach the basics, which includes Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal Halacha, just not Mayonis HaChachma. And now comes the Rebbe and gives this revolutionary biur in understanding who is Moshe Rabbeinu and what happens when even something so potentially peripheral changes, how it affects the entire situation. From the fact that something was concealed from him, even though it won't affect his influence on the Yidden. Moshe takes this as an indication that his tenure has ended, his time of leadership has ended, and it is now time for Yeshua to become the next leader of the Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu says, if I don't have access to everything that I had access to, if something is being taken from me, this is a sign that my time is up. And the Rebbe takes us a step deeper. It's well known what the Chazal teach us, and Rashi brings it in Chumash. And from the fact that Rashi brings it is an indication to us that this is something that's pshat. It's accessible to every single one of us. As Pnei Moshe kechamo, Pnei Yeshua kelavana. Moshe's countenance is compared to the sun. Yeshua's countenance is compared to the moon. One of the differences between the sun and the moon, or the light of the sun and the light of the moon, is as the light of the moon is constantly fluctuating, it's waxing, it's waning. Aliyas v'yiridus. Is the takin shuni, whereas the light of the sun is consistent. It's unchanging. And this helps us understand why Moshe is compared to the sun. Because as we know from other places that Moshe is the idea of Moshe emes, the attribute of Moshe is the attribute of truth. Vasinyana is built which what defines truth, the fact that it is unchanging, that it is constant and eternal. The Rabbi brings in the heart of the pasuk, Sfas emes tikkun la'ad. True words will stand forever, because the whole idea of emes is that it's eternal. Eternal and unchanging. Implying that in the light of Moshe there is no change possible. The whole definition of Moshe's light is that it is unchanging, which is why we've learned previously in Likutei Sichos that if Moshe brought the Yidden into Eretz Yisrael, there would have never been a Galus. Because if Moshe does something, and the same thing is with the Mishkan, that there are certain parts of the Mishkan that had to be built by the Yidden, because otherwise there would be no Churban. There would not be able to be a Churban. Because Moshe is emes. When Moshe does something, it doesn't change and it stays forever. The Riber. B'shas Moshe Rabbeinu had field as nistimu mimenu mayones hachachma. When Moshe realized that these wellsprings of wisdom are concealed from him, since there was a blockage and a change in his light. This told Moshe, this shows Moshe that his light has been affected. Now his Lotzis V'Lavi is affected. In other words, the Lotzis V'Lavi, in a sense, is not just his teaching of Torah. Lotzis V'Lavi is his leadership, his Nesias. Moshe says, Lotzis V'Lavi, I cannot anymore be the Nasi because I used that something, even though it's not part of the core aspect of Torah, it's not a necessary required part of Torah, but it is something of my light that is changing. This is my sign that my time is up. And therefore it doesn't matter where the change happened. Even if it's in an area that doesn't affect his influence on the Yidden. Is it etzem inyan hashinui? The very fact that something changed in Moshe, it's already a proof that something that it's a time for change. We have to usher in an era of change, which is the light of Yeshua. So this is the pshat in the pasuk, according to Rashi, according to the Rabbi's explanation. Moshe Rabbeinu is saying to the Yidden, I cannot be anymore the one who leads in the teaching of Torah, because since something has been hidden from me, I am not able. That proves to me that the oyer of Moshe has been changed, and therefore it tells me that there's a new era upon us, the era of Yeshua. Von der Minyan, wie es ist bei Menschen, wird in der Avede von jeder Ritten. The Rebbe now applies this to every single Yid. Warum as mi uzev Yezu asher arav libe legerses lasik al fil chelek echad mini aleph. Even though you're going to say 1 second, this is Moshe Rabbeinu. We're simple people, and as the Rebbe quotes from Tanya, who is the one who is so brave to say that he could approach even an iota of a thousandth of an iota of the level of the Raya Mehemna, of the faithful shepherd, the shepherd of faith, which is Moshe Rabbeinu. Is aber mitzadem vas kol nefesh v'nefesh mebeis Yisrael yeslo mechinas Moshe Rabbeinu shalom. But in a previous Perek in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says that every single Yid has a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu in them. So every Yid could reach at least to an iota of the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. So therefore, if this is how we speak about Moshe Rabbeinu, the Moshe Rabbeinu, when he feels something changed, it affects his entire life, it affects his entire being, which was a teacher of Torah and a leader of Klal Yisrael, that with us as well, we have to recognize and appreciate how valuable every detail of Torah is to us, and to not lose it, to not forget it, to not give up on it. Because if by Moshe Rabbeinu a shinui it affects his entire life, so also by every single Yid, a shinui in Torah, something that's missing, something that changes to obviously to the negative, is something that affects our entire life. This would explain what Chazal say, that someone who forgets even one detail of his learning, the Torah considers it as if he is forfeiting his life. Why should such a harsh consequence befall this person for forgetting one detail in a Mishnah? When you're talking as a gedenkel, it's possible that this person is a giant in Torah and remembers everything that he learns besides for one detail. And yet you're saying that this person is chayiv b'nafshay, is eine von der Biyurim and them. Torah is not just an intellectual pursuit. that you want to know that if this happens, that happens. If this happens, the halacha is like this, or to exercise your brain. Rather, the words of Torah become engraved with the very existence of the Yid. Every word of Torah affects the very existence of the person. And therefore, if a person could forget even one detail of his Mishnah, regardless of the quantity, this should break the person, as if his life is ending. Because it's your oxygen, it's your life. It's not like, oh, I understand a lot of Torah, so I'm good. If you learn Torah, and the Torah becomes part of you, and then you forget something, that means a piece of your life is missing. If a piece of your life is missing, this person has to realize this. So this is point number one. What we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu is that the Torah that we learn is integral to every aspect of our being. And every single word of Torah is that way. And therefore, if chas v'shalom, a person forgets one piece of his Torah, that means a piece of his life is missing. Let's expand this into the area of time. That every single moment of a person's life should be tied in with Torah. And if a Yid, chas v'shalom, stops learning, even if it's a moment, but he could have been learning Torah in that time, and he doesn't, is he tikaris. As the Alter Rebbe brings in the first perek of Tanya, based on Chazal, then he's worthy of karis, of his life being severed, because he stopped learning. Why? Because it's because by not learning, it affects his existence. The Torah is his life. So if there's a piece of Torah that he forgets, that affects his life. If there's a moment in time that he could have been learning and is not learning, this also affects his life. It's not about the quantity of time. A person can say, I learned 23 hours, and now I skipped 2 minutes. It's not about that. No, the very fact that a moment passed when he wasn't engaged in Torah, it means that he was not breathing. He wasn't alive in that moment, and this has to affect the person. So the Rebbe begins with davar echad mishnasei, that every detail that a person learns has to remain integral to the person's life. Then the Rebbe expands that to time, that every moment of a person's time has to be permeated with Torah. And now the Rebbe says the same thing. Let's expand it, let's zoom out and leave it a little bit more with regards to every aspect of Yiddishkeit. Weil Derech says, when it gets to alle Jahre von Yiddishkeit, by Eden darf der Inyan von Avodas Hashem sein Nechek and sein Metzius. By a Yid, the idea of serving Hashem has to be engraved in his very being. Isaiah has cleansed the Inyan von Avodas Hashem. The smallest detail of serving Hashem, afilu al diktu kalso divrei sefer, afilu minigli Yisrael, even a small detail in the teachings of the Rabbanon, or even a minig, Darfim zayin negea benefesh has to be important to him, to his very soul. Because that if he misses something, even if it's just one little detail, and it's something that's very seemingly insignificant, it affects his entire being. So every part of Torah, every moment in time, and every aspect of Avodas Hashem, a person has to realize that this is his entire existence. And if it's one detail is missing, or one moment is missing, or one aspect in his Avodas Hashem is missing, this affects his entire being. And now to the positive. So a person is going to say, what do you want from me? This seems too much. It says the very knowledge that this is the situation will bring a person to increase and to grow in serving Hashem. And in a manner that he realizes and he feels that every good deed that he does, every good thing that he does is actually increasing his oxygen, his actual life. Because it's connecting him to the source of all light, of all life. The Eibishter, those who cleave to Hashem are all alive today. Where does the life come from? It comes from the Eibishter. And how does he connect to the Eibishter? Through learning Torah, through doing mitzvahs, through utilizing every moment for good things. And therefore, when a person realizes how vital this is, he engages in this way, and therefore he taps in to the source of all light. So here's Moshe Rabbeinu's last day. Rashi brings b'divrei Torah, b'lamed. This teaches us that the well springs and the transmissions of wisdom were concealed from him. The Rebbe learns pshat that what happened is that Moshe felt a change. He didn't lose anything. The Rebbe in the Haaretz says that Hashem wouldn't take anything away from Moshe, but there was a blockage where Moshe could not access additional Masayres or additional Mayanis HaChachma. And therefore Moshe says to himself, this must tell me something about myself, about where I'm holding as the Nasi of Klal Yisrael, and I have to pass the baton to Yeshua. And the Rebbe, of course, learns the lesson to us, how integral and how vital every detail of Torah is, and every moment of our time is, just like it was by Moshe Rabbeinu, so to every single one of us. And when we recognize the value of Torah and of every single moment, then this connects us with the source of life, the Eibishter.